In the center of Europe, inside a union built on democracy, cooperation, and collective strength, stands one political figure who has mastered the art of standing apart while standing inside. A figure who shapes policy not through size or economic weight, but through resistance. A leader who calls his state an illiberal democracy and has turned that model into a geopolitical instrument. This is the story of Viktor Orbán, the man who has become Europe's internal outsider, NATO's quiet disruptor, and Russia's most useful partner inside the Western alliance. Orbán is not a bridge between the EU and the former Soviet space in a traditional sense. He is the lever, the one leader who can slow, dilute, or reshape Europe's major decisions from inside the system itself, and this is how he does it. Welcome to Gauge Introductory, the intersection where power defines policy and capital drives outcomes. Thank you for your time. Viktor Orbán understands something many European leaders underestimated. Power in the EU is not only about influence, it is about obstruction. The European Union operates on consensus for nearly all foreign policy decisions. One veto, one refusal to sign, one delay, and 26 other countries have no choice but to negotiate. Orbán has turned that system into political capital. On Russian sanctions, on aid to Ukraine, on financial reform, on energy policy, the EU cannot act unless Hungary agrees. That gives Orbán a level of leverage that far exceeds Hungary's population or economic weight. He uses this leverage tactically, not ideologically. He doesn't block everything. He blocks what matters, what gives him bargaining power, what pressures Brussels, and what forces Europe to deal with him on his terms. This is not bridging, this is strategic friction. Through it, Orbán has made Hungary the decisive minority voice in one of the world's most powerful political unions. From Moscow to Baku, from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan, Orbán has built relationships that stand in contrast to the EU's official positions. Where Europe distances itself, Orbán steps closer. He maintains regular dialogue with Vladimir Putin, he negotiates long-term gas deals with Russia, he deepens cooperation with Azerbaijan on energy transit, he opens channels with Central Asian governments Europe labels authoritarian. This does not make him a mediator. Rather, he becomes the one EU leader willing to speak when others won't, and that willingness gives him influence. To Russia and the post-Soviet world, Orbán is a window into the European system. To the EU, Orbán is a reminder that unity is fragile, and the East-West divide is not limited to borders. Because while most of Europe has repositioned itself away from the Kremlin, Hungary has kept a foot in both worlds. This dual alignment allows Orbán to soften Europe's stance, slow down punitive measures, keep diplomatic channels open, prevent full geopolitical isolation of Russia and its partners. The effect is subtle but powerful. He doesn't repair relations, he reshapes them. Inside the European Union, Hungary is widely seen as the bloc's most problematic member state, not for its economy, but for its governance. Orbán's model of illiberal democracy has drawn criticism for judicial weakening, media capture, pressure on civil society, selective use of state power, a political system tilted toward the ruling party. For EU institutions, Hungary is not just political opposition, it is a structural challenge, a test of whether the EU can enforce its democratic values on its own members. Brussels has frozen billions in funding to Hungary. Orbán responded by blocking Ukraine aid and delaying key EU decisions. This standoff has turned Hungary into a symbol of democratic backsliding, a negotiation challenge, a veto threat, and an unpredictable actor within the Union. Member states like France, Germany, the Nordics, and the Baltics view Hungary with deep distrust. Even countries ideologically aligned with parts of Orbán's agenda, like Italy under Meloni, maintain distance on Russia. Inside the EU Parliament, Orbán is often the subject of resolutions, debates, and investigations. But his leverage remains intact because Europe cannot remove Hungary, and it cannot proceed without Hungary. If the EU sees Hungary as a political problem, NATO sees Hungary as a strategic liability. Orbán has delayed Sweden's NATO membership, refused to give weapons to Ukraine, maintained close ties with Russian intelligence-linked figures, adopted positions contrary to alliance strategy. Within NATO, Hungary is described as the least reliable ally after Turkey, a weak link in intelligence sharing, a structural risk inside the alliance. Security analysts warn that Russia benefits from Orbán's position, not because Hungary would defect, but because it slows unity and complicates coordination. For NATO, Hungary is not dangerous because it is powerful, but because it gives adversaries a foothold inside the alliance. Orbán is the one leader who keeps channels open with Moscow at a time when the rest of NATO moves in the opposite direction. Again, not a bridge, but a strategic vacuum, a point of ambiguity in a world defined by sharp alignments. Orbán's rise is not accidental, it is engineered. He came to power in 2010 with a landslide victory, then used that moment to restructure the state. A new constitution, media consolidation, court reforms, political appointments, electoral system changes, centralized state influence. These moves secured long-term political dominance, but Orbán's true genius was not domestic, it was geopolitical. He realized that the EU and NATO's rules, built on trust, consensus, and shared values, gave him leverage. He turned EU funding mechanisms, veto powers, energy negotiations, geopolitical divisions into tools of influence. By aligning partially with Russia, partially with Europe, and partially with China, Orbán created a multi-directional foreign policy that gives him bargaining power with all sides. His domestic power becomes international leverage, and his international positioning reinforces his domestic narrative. Hungary as the sovereign nation, resisting Brussels' overreach. This feedback loop is the foundation of Orbánism. Energy is the artery of Orbán's strategy. Hungary relies heavily on Russian gas, and Orbán uses this dependence not just for security, but for diplomacy. He can justify cooperation with Russia through price stability, long-term supply deals, infrastructure partnerships, nuclear energy projects like PAX-2. This allows him to maintain ties with Moscow even when Europe moves in the opposite direction. To the EU it looks like concession. To Orbán it is sovereignty. Energy dependence becomes geopolitical leverage. He can argue against sanctions, he can negotiate preferential terms, he can slow Europe's energy transition, he can position Hungary as an energy transit state. This gives Hungary influence far beyond its size. For years, the EU has tried to discipline Hungary. Funding freezes, legal action, rule of law conditionality, parliamentary condemnations, none of it has worked. Because to truly discipline Hungary, the EU would need to remove voting rights or suspend membership, moves that require unanimous agreement, including Hungary's own vote. It is a political paradox. To punish Orbán, Europe needs Orbán's permission. This structural flaw gives him protection no other leader in Europe enjoys. And as long as that remains true, Orbán will continue to extract concessions, stall decisions, and position himself as a sovereign voice inside a supranational system. Orbán matters because he represents more than Hungary. He represents a challenge to liberal democracy from within, a geopolitical ambiguity inside Western alliances, a model admired by some rising political movements, a case study in how institutional rules can be weaponized, a warning about the fragility of European unity. Orbán shows that the greatest divide in Europe is not between East and West, but between the idea of Europe and the sovereignty of its members. As long as that tension exists, Orbán's strategy will remain effective. He is not a bridge, he is not an outsider. He is the insider who refuses to conform, the leader who stands inside the structure while questioning its foundations. This is a political figure who understands that institutions can be influenced not only by collaboration, but by resistance, and so Europe faces a deeper question. Is the threat to unity coming from adversaries abroad or from within its own walls? Viktor Orbán has positioned Hungary at the crossroads of Europe's identity crisis, a nation too embedded to exclude, too sovereign to control, and too strategic to ignore. As Europe confronts new geopolitical realities, war, energy, dependency, shifting alliances, and rising nationalism, one thing becomes clear. You cannot understand the future of the European project without understanding the influence of the man reshaping it from within. This is Viktor Orbán, this is Hungary, and this is Gauging Productory. Do be sure to select the next story you'd like to watch on your screen, or browse the extensive catalogue on our channel page. Thank you again.